good morning, good evening, and good afternoon wherever we find you. My name is Jamie, and this is Bad News. This week, we visit Corruption Corner for the second time in this show's short run, as we dip our toes into one of the biggest political stories of this government. Under the spotlight this time is Keir Starmer. After a string of scandals with regards to corruption came up last week, Prime Minister has pledged to end corruption scandals once and for all by discontinuing their policy in totem of accepting gifts. In refusing to not take one more piece of financial aid from donors, what can we expect for the future of the Labour Party? More so, what does this mean for their relationship with Lord Ali and other powerful lobbyists that want to offer financial support and aid to politicians in return for favour? Will we see a reinvigoration of the Tories, like we did with Obama in 2008 when he refused to take state funding for his campaign, which enabled him to further continue collecting private donations all the way up until election day, while McCain hamstrung himself by accepting state election funding, shutting him off to private interests? What does this mean now for the Tories that essentially have a monopoly on lobbyists, and 5 more years of being able to solicit them without any major competition? The scandal has arisen mostly from Lord Ali and his relationship with Starmer's cabinet. As the major player in this lobbying run, basically a string of his stories have come out basically talking about how he supported the Labour Party and gave them gifts. A lot of them very convenient gifts, such as last week he gifted Starmer's wife Victoria a dress, and as he declared it, the media came swooping down to take a jab, obviously. Not only that, but Angela Rayner came under fire too, as journalists ran to the .gov website to see if they could find a greater connection between Lord Ali and the Labour Party on the expenses lists. In 2023, he gifted Angela Rayner hospitality in the form of a 5-night stay in one of his New York apartments. A personal holiday, they called it. The Express makes the argument that this particular gift was underreported in value, claiming that the Airbnb stays in the same period exceed the value of their declared sum by about £750 per night. To be honest, when it comes to declaring any kind of expenses, taxes in this country, you always just represent it because of red tape, basically. We have so much red tape in this country with regards to doing absolutely anything with your money that it has become basically a culture to underreport your earnings, underreport your spending, basically underreport anything just to make sure that you can have just a little bit more money and a little bit more time away from, government scrutiny, basically. And in a way, Labour have kind of hamstrung themselves in this sense because they made this criticism to begin with. Lord Ali's close relationship with the cabinet has been well documented in the past too, with top members of the Labour cabinet using his mansions for parties, his dresses for wardrobe, and various services and hospitality for convenience. This time round, I'd say there was actually a proportionate outrage from the media concerning this issue this time. And in terms of the actual, point of the outrage, I think they're pretty correct in what they're outraged about. In fact, many journalists admit that this sort of declared mutual interest does not constitute wrongdoing, but they've decided now to reveal this specific information to the public to highlight the hypocrisy of Labour, who often criticised the Tories when they were in the opposition for doing similar things, such as Boris Johnson, who received expensive wallpaper, to use a number 10, and various other things. Also a well-known convention that MPs take gifts from firms and lobby groups. There is a problem, however, with the way in which the system is used. Lord Ali is often meeting and communicating with MPs, often in areas without legal or parliamentary permission. He is allowed into these circles because he helps a great deal with the day-to-day running of the executive office of the Labour Party. Other firms offer support in return for favour too. We've seen Arsenal, who put Starmer up for a box in Arsenal's first game at the Emirates this season. Starmer argued that this was for security reasons, as does Robert Peston for ITV. But for me, that's irrelevant. He's the Prime Minister. He should get a box everywhere he goes. He leads our country. It's strange to feel or to want to feel financial envy for politicians on this specific level. It should not be a concern of security, but one of respect for the highest office in the country. Especially since hearing from Liz Truss's book, and you can say what you want about her, but she does make a point when she talks about the executive office not providing her with haircuts, wardrobe, or even enough staff to support her with her work. Similar claims are being made by Rachel Reeves, who's recently said her household budget is as tight is very tight as Chancellor. Perhaps she's bad with money, which is ironic for a Chancellor of the Exchequer, but I do feel she does have a point, despite her obvious flaw of being a penny-scattering socialist. In 1938, Neville Chamberlain's salary was £10,000, equivalent to about 800k in today's money. Starmer's is 172. The office of the Prime Minister is the highest office in the land, and receives less money than his own Chief of Staff, Sue Gray. And even when Sue Gray was asked, do you want to receive a little bit less money than Starmer to just make it look a little bit better, she said no. We are totally consumed with envy for politicians in this country, and I'm not sure why. It seems like a terrible job. You get underpaid, you get no help, and more than half the country hates you once you finish the job. I understand that 170k is a lot compared to the average Brit, but you need to put into proper perspective. High maintenance lifestyles such as these are a business expense in themselves, particularly if you are a politician. Everything from your hair to your car needs to convey a certain message. You represent all of us, and it shouldn't be such a taboo to expect the top 30 individuals in public office to have their expenses covered. I personally think that such expenses, whether it be hospitality, wardrobe, hairdressing, makeup, voice coaching, physiotherapy, medical prescriptions, they should all be expensed. Cabinet ministers should have the ability to either access an expenses budget or have a salary representative of their status as individuals in British society. I do not see CEOs of banking firms having to have other people buy their suits for them. I do not have much sympathy for them, however, though, as they did not share this same attitude before they were elected into government. The source of the initial outrage of the media was this particular point. You'll perhaps see centre-left accounts on Twitter try to reframe this argument and to make it about the gifts themselves. But this is not the point of critique. The Labour Party initially fell for the media outrage when they were in opposition over the Tories' behaviour with regards to expenses and gifts in the past. And so, in order to make up for their indulgences, they must flagellate and punish themselves. Starmer's response to this has chosen to be to refuse all gifts going into the future. This will unfortunately just make it worse for Starmer. It is an inevitability that before 2029, another Labour MP will take another gift, and the carousel will spin again. It's unfortunate but avoidable. And what this also means is that for a lot of backbench MPs and a lot of MPs without much influence, are just going to choose to not declare their interests when they receive gifts. And while they might get caught for it, it makes it a lot harder to catch them for it because they're not personally declaring their interest. It will definitely develop into something else for the week going forward, simply because it's kind of indicative of how out of touch politicians are, not only with the public, but with themselves. And now finally, the Labour Party are in charge. Left-wing newspapers have actually had the correct response to this, which is not to kind of do what the Americans are doing with Kamala Harris right now, which is, playing cover for all of her gaffes and kind of not criticising her at all, just for the sake of winning. Because, they've won now. The Labour Party have already won. And it's actually time to criticise stuff you don't like and you see that's that's wrong. Yeah, it's a problem with perspective, and it's a problem with the fact that they're just out of touch with each other as well as themselves. You can kind of see this about basically the way, all the way up until Labour gained power, they were trying to basically convince the world that the problem with the Tories was their greediness, and there was a certain moral flaw in the Conservative Party, and that was its corruptive, avaricious one. And the truth is, actually, it's the complete opposite. And now that Labour are in power, they've realised this. The problem isn't, the avariciousness of the political class and their kind of greed. It's the fact that their job doesn't pay them enough money for what they actually do. And so, in order to finance that, and in order to do an actual good job, you actually have to spend money in order to look good, to sound good, to be good. You have to put in a lot of work, and to put in a lot of work, you need to pay people to do that work for you. So it's going to be expensive, and your salary is not going to cover, one person's salary is not going to cover your specific needs and wants as a cabinet minister. And this is why lobbies have been able to gain a lot of power in the British political system. And it's not because politicians are rich. It's actually because politicians aren't rich enough. In fact, I do actually think sometimes that if you gave people like Rachel Reeves, like maybe Liz Truss, like Theresa May, not people like Johnson, obviously not people like Johnson, obviously not, certain other members of parliament, they'll obviously always want to be as rich as they possibly can. But I think for a majority of MPs that we vote for in our constituencies, people like Rachel Reeves, people like Wes Streeting, people like Jake, even say what you want about Jacob Rees-Mogg, I don't think he's susceptible to corruption. And I think MPs like this, if they are paid enough money, for example, anywhere between £200,000 and £500,000 a year, dare I say it, they won't need the money. They won't need the gifts. They won't need other people to tell them what to say and do in return for critical help, financial aid when they're doing what they're doing. It shouldn't be a controversial thing to want at least the top 10, top 15 cabinet ministers to be millionaires. It shouldn't be a bad thing. And I actually think that the main important difference is not the amount of money, but where they get that money from. If 90% of that money comes from the state, then you can guarantee that 90% of those interests will be in the interests of the public, because that is where the money is coming from. However, if you have 50% of someone's paycheck, 50% of someone's paycheck being in the hands of banks, private equity groups, foreign countries, then you can guarantee that 50% of their interests as a politician will go where their money goes. It's not rocket science, unfortunately, but this is where we've got to as a country. And that's it for today's episode. I've decided to kind of change the format of this show because obviously I kind of realised that stories move pretty fast, and if I want to post, write, film, record, edit, post, I've got to get out as quickly as possible, basically. So I'm just going to do one story at a time, quick fire. If I can fit 2 or 3 stories in, smaller stories, I will. But yeah, I'm just trying to basically cover big stories, at least once a week. So yeah, I'll see you next week. Thank you very much for watching.